This is the SR-71 Blackbird. Faster than a rifle bullet. Higher than any aircraft was ever supposed to fly. Across 3 decades of service, more than 4,000 missiles were fired at it. Not one ever touched it. So why did the one aircraft that nothing in the sky could kill almost kill itself? On the 1st of May 1960, 70,000 feet above the Soviet Union, Francis Gary Powers believed nothing could reach him. His U-2 drifted over secret missile sites, higher than any aircraft ever built. Then, a surface-to-air missile tore through the sky and tore that belief to pieces. The U-2 fell from 70,000 feet to 30,000. Powers survived, bailed out, and parachuted straight into the waiting hands of the Red Army. Days later, Moscow paraded him before the cameras of the world, standing beside the wreckage of a spy plane America had sworn did not exist. But the real fear in Washington wasn't the humiliation. It was colder than that. If the Soviets could bring down one spy plane, they could bring down every one that followed. The door to Soviet skies had just slammed shut in America's face. They needed something else. An aircraft flying so high, so fast, that no air defense on Earth could touch it. The order from the CIA read like science fiction. Fly above 80,000 feet, 3 times the speed of sound, nearly invisible to radar, and ready in 20 months, if you please. Most engineers just looked at one another. A material that could survive it? No one had forged one. An engine powerful enough? No one had built one. Every aviation textbook said the same single word, no. But there was one man who never accepted that word. Clarence Kelly, Johnson chief engineer at Lockheed, head of the secret design team known as Skunk Works. The aviation world called him the Leonardo da Vinci of the skies. He never asked whether something was possible. He assumed it was, then found the way to make it real. As he later admitted, everything had to be invented. Everything. To fly faster than a bullet, his team would have to conquer an enemy capable of melting every metal mankind had ever known. To fly far enough, they would need a fuel that didn't yet exist. And if they succeeded, they would build a machine so far ahead of its time that, 60 years later, no one would ever build its equal. But first, they had to defeat 3 enemies, one by one. Touch the hood of a car on a blazing summer afternoon, and you snatch your hand back. Now multiply that heat by 10, wrap it around an entire aircraft, and make it endure for hours. That was the Blackbird's world at full speed. At 3 times the speed of sound, the air ahead can't get out of the way. It compresses, scrapes, and ignites into an invisible wall of fire around the aircraft. The Blackbird's nose reached 570 degrees Fahrenheit. The rear of the engine nacelles touched 1,200, hot enough to cook anything alive. And the heat threw its first punch. Aluminum, the metal in nearly every aircraft ever flown, softens at barely 300 degrees. Take it to Mach 3, and it would sag across the sky like ice cream left in the sun. Johnson needed something far tougher. Only one name was up to the task: titanium. But here was the catch. Most of the world's purest titanium lay in the hands of a single nation, and that nation was the Soviet Union, the very country the Blackbird was being built to spy on. So what did the Americans do? They bought it from the enemy. The CIA set up a web of shell companies, quietly buying titanium from Moscow and shipping it to California. The Soviets never realized they were selling the very metal America would use to build a machine that would soar over their heads for 30 years, one of the most audacious cons of the Cold War. But getting the metal was only the beginning. Titanium was unbelievably stubborn, hard, and brittle at once, cracking like glass the moment standard steel tools touched it. No tool of the era could cut it. So Skunk Works built their own tools out of titanium to cut titanium. It was so hard that, at one point, 80% of incoming metal was rejected for contamination. They weren't just building an aircraft. They were learning to tame a beast no one had ever dared to ride. But the enemy called heat still had one final blow. Nearly every airliner is painted white to reflect sunlight and stay cooler. Yet Johnson did the opposite. He painted the fastest aircraft in the world is black, the color that absorbs the most heat. It sounds like suicide. But there's a law of physics named after Kirchhoff. A body that absorbs heat well also radiates it just as well. At 80,000 feet, the sun is weak. The real heat comes from friction with the air. Up there, black wasn't the enemy. It was the savior, shedding heat faster than the aircraft took it in. And that black paint gave the machine its legendary name, the Blackbird. Kelly Johnson had a famous rule: 1 miracle per program. With the Blackbird, he broke his own rule, because the next miracle was wilder than them all. How do you burn fuel in the middle of a fire fierce enough to melt everything? Fuel, the very thing keeping the Blackbird alive in the sky, could also turn it into a fireball in the blink of an eye. Ordinary jet fuel is highly volatile. At the temperatures the Blackbird endured, it would boil, vaporize, and wait for a single spark to blow the aircraft apart. Flying Mach 3 on it would be like sitting on a barrel of explosives held over an open flame. So Johnson asked Shell for something that had never existed, a fuel almost impossible to ignite. After months of struggle, they produced JP-7 so stable it was practically inert. As Blackbird pilot Colonel Rich Graham recalled, "I've seen a crew chief throw a match into JP-7 and it just extinguishes." Wonderful. A perfectly safe fuel, with just one small problem. If a match couldn't light it, how on earth would the engine start? Skunkworks' solution sounded like a joke told by men with a death wish. If the fuel is too gentle to catch fire, light it with something so insane it refuses to stop burning. That was TEB, a chemical that bursts into flame the instant it touches air. No spark, no primer. Expose it to open sky, and it explodes. Graham described it in a way that makes anyone shudder. Load TEB into a squirt gun, fire it into the air, and it detonates on the spot a sharp little kaboom the instant it meets the air. Each engine carried exactly 16 shots of TEB. 16. Every engine start, every afterburner kick burned one. A flash of green in the exhaust signaled it had done its job. 16 shots, and no more. Over hostile skies, miscounting could mean never making it home. And yet, JP-7 and TEB still weren't the strangest part. The real secret of the Blackbird's fuel lay somewhere no one would expect. Its titanium skin expanded in heat and shrank in cold. On the ground, the panels fit loosely and fuel seeped out, pooling beneath the runway. The ground crew saw it every morning and didn't blink. Because it wasn't a fault. It was the design. As the Blackbird accelerated, the heat made the panels swell and seal perfectly, turning the airframe into a tank as tight as a rocket. To save weight, the engineers had made the aircraft's own skin the fuel tank, no lining, no bladder. Its skin was the tank. So the Blackbird didn't leak because it was broken. It leaked because it was built to fly so fast it sealed itself in midair. And the heart that swallowed all that strange fuel was stranger still. The J-58 was no ordinary engine. At low speed, it ran like a normal jet. But as the Blackbird pushed faster, it transformed into something close to a ramjet swallowing the supersonic storm screaming past its nose for thrust. To control that storm, a cone in the air intake slid back and forth as much as 2 feet, holding the shockwave exactly in place. If it drifted even slightly, the shockwave could be spat out of the intake, triggering a terrifying event called an unstart. One engine would die in an instant, and the aircraft, faster than a bullet, would lurch violently to one side, as if slapped by a giant hand. And on a January day in 1966, that exact nightmare happened at Mach 3.2. Bill Weaver never even saw it coming. He was a seasoned test pilot, at the controls with reconnaissance specialist Jim Zwayer behind him. The flight was smooth, exactly to plan, until Weaver banked into a turn and one engine suddenly unstarted. It happened faster than thought. The enormous thrust on one side vanished in an instant, and the aircraft, faster than a bullet, twisted violently. Weaver jammed the stick hard into the corner of the cockpit. Useless. The aircraft no longer answered him. "I knew that we were just going along for the ride," he said later. He knew he was nothing more than a passenger on a machine that had lost its mind. In under 2 seconds, the Blackbird began to break apart around the two men. The brutal centrifugal force should have crushed them. Weaver blacked out. When he came to, His first sensation was a nightmare with no way out. I thought I was having a terrible nightmare. But the pain was too real, the rushing wind too real. This was no dream. And if it wasn't a dream, only one possibility remained. He was dead. And yet, he wasn't. The force of the disintegrating aircraft had flung him clear, into a free fall from the edge of space. His pressure suit, identical to an astronaut's, kept him alive in the killing cold and pressure at that altitude. His parachute opened on its own. Weaver drifted down into New Mexico, hundreds of miles from base, still alive. Jim Zwayer was not. The violent twist of the aircraft broke his neck the instant it came apart. He was gone at once, before he could even understand what was happening. The investigation revealed a bitter truth. In tuning the Blackbird to fly faster, the engineers had unintentionally made it unstable. They had pushed it too close to the edge of physics, and at Mach 3.2, the smallest error was enough to become catastrophe. Back at base, one man was preparing to say goodbye. Pilot Bob Gilliland heard the aircraft was down and was certain Weaver was dead. In Weaver's locker sat 2 cigars. Gilliland took one, meaning to light it in his friend's memory, quietly promising that if Weaver were somehow alive, he'd buy him a whole box of the finest cigars. A few hours later, the phone at the base rang. On the other end was a collect call from a man named Bill Weaver. He was alive, and true to his word, Gilliland owed him a box of cigars. The Blackbird had nearly killed the man who tested it, but that was only one of many times this machine danced on the edge of disaster. Because a few years later, when it went to war, the enemy would no longer be physics, it would be real missiles. For more than 2 decades, the Blackbird did exactly what it was born to do: fly to the most dangerous places on Earth and always come home. More than 4,000 missiles were fired to bring it down. Not one ever found its mark. Its evasive tactic was almost insolent in its simplicity: just accelerate and leave every threat behind. In 1986, over Libya, the warning lights flared in Brian Schul's cockpit as missile batteries locked on. He pushed the throttles past their limit. The Blackbird surged so fast, even the pilots didn't know how fast they were going. The gauge only read to Mach 3.5. The missiles fell away behind them, helpless. But the Blackbird's final enemy did not fly at supersonic speed, and it was never launched from any battery. On the 6th of March 1990, an SR-71 flew its last mission in U.S. Air Force service, racing from Los Angeles to Washington in just 67 minutes and 54 seconds, setting 4 world records still unbroken today. It was not a defeat, it was a final bow. So what brought down the machine no missile could touch? The answer was in Washington, in a budget meeting. Satellites, it was argued, could do the job for less. And so, the fastest aircraft mankind ever built was retired not by an enemy, but by a balance sheet. For 30 years, no machine ever replaced the Blackbird. Its technology was so far ahead of its time, it became almost impossible to recreate. Titanium is still brutally hard to machine. JP7 remains uniquely its own. An entire generation of engineers has passed, and no one has done again what Skunk Works did. Now the final successor is taking shape. The SR-72, an unmanned aircraft capable of Mach 6 twice as fast as its forebear. It will use heat-resistant composites far beyond titanium, with engine parts 3D printed and cooling ducts built right inside. But the SR-72 will have no cockpit, no one to watch the curve of the Earth from the edge of space, no one to count down each shot of TEB with trembling hands. Ultimate speed is now achieved by removing the very thing that made the Blackbird a legend, the human being. Today, if you visit the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum, you'll find it there, silent, still. Its jet black titanium skin still gleaming with the same cold beauty it had the day it left the factory. And if you look closely at the floor beneath it, you'll sometimes still see a thin trail of fuel seeping out. 60 years on, behind a barrier, never to fly again, it still leaks. As if it's still waiting, still longing to stretch once more in the heat of Mach 3, to seal itself shut and run. The Blackbird was built to defeat heat, to defeat its own fuel, to defeat the fastest missiles its enemies could ever build. It defeated them all. The only thing it could never outrun was time. This is the SR-71 Blackbird. A machine from the future, built by the people of the past.